UCD. I'm doing my master degree in international relations and cultural diplomacy. One day I wish to have that kind of career, but for now I'm just doing my master degree, and for that master degree I need to do to research for my thesis, and I've decided to research on a specific topic, which is transnational museums. So transnational museum, I mean transnational by itself means something which is expanding or operating across national boundaries. So for that museum, it means that one specific museum open another one or extend its activities abroad. So a good example is, for example, Guggenheim. So that very well-known modern and contemporary art museum opened in the 90s another Guggenheim, but first time in Spain, in Bilbao. So I focus on that subject, but since I'm a student here for international relations, I try to prove that that kind of museum have an impact, an influence on international relations. So for that, I've decided to focus more on one specific museum, so Le Louvre Abu Dhabi. It's really disturbing. So for that,
be nice with her.
For that kind of museum, I've decided to take that museum, and now I'm lost.
Just forget him, Zoe. He does that to me as well.
Fine.
Just forget him. Yeah.
Say what I'm saying. So yeah, that museum, I want to prove that this museum has an influence on international relations. So for that one, on relations between France and the Emirates. So I want to prove that this museum had an impact and still has an impact and influence on that on this relationship. So it has influence on 3 different levels, more or less. The first one is politic. So after the creation, the sign of the agreement between both countries to create that museum, we have seen an increase of military. Sorry, I'm quite sick as well. An increase of military contract between those 2 countries, a creation of a French military base in that country. So, and also an agreement for training of the Emirates troop by the French troop. So all of that has one goal, so increase both country influence. The second influence of that museum is economic. By itself, since that museum has been created in that city, so it has a positive impact on the revenue for that city and that region, since it's supposed to bring more tourists and more and develop more in touristic infrastructure, whatever, you got me. So after that, and for France by itself is a good way. In more general way, for France it's quite positive because it's a way to tie more business link between French companies and Emirates companies. And for the Emirates is also quite positive because it's a way to diversify more its economy by itself. And the last point, but not the least, it's a good way to improve both countries' image, so it's really linked to soft power, cultural diplomacy, because this museum is going to improve Emirates' image through, they really want to be the cultural leader of that region, so they want to really link their values, the name of their country, to the positive values linked to art and culture. And for France, it's a good way also to brand themselves as a really cultural country, and also a way to export and literally sell its culture abroad. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Zoe. We are still waiting for Nathaly, but we will not wait in silence, so basically we can start discussing a little bit. I will stay with you, Zoe. So basically, you chose museums, and yes, we know that you're doing your master's at the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy. However, if you can tell us, like, what derived you to choose museums, like, why museums, and how do you think museums and museums narrative can have this influence on the international relations? I know that you went through it a lot in the presentation, but I would go more into the narrative and the interpretation of museum.
Well, for museum, this is more like a personal choice. I've worked for 4 years in Centre Pompidou of Metz, so it's a modern art, modern and contemporary art museum. It was really a real pleasure to work there, and art and cultural institution really interest me. So when I've realized all the influence of one specific museum on such a large scale, which is international relation, I've decided to dedicate my thesis to that subject because it's a really broad subject, and for me it's like a future trend for that topic. So I really wanted to go further on that subject and to talk more about the implication of that museum. After, it depends also of the will of the government. Here, France and the Emirates, the UAE were really motivated. There was a real will for both countries to improve and to tight more link between them. But it's a really good way to create more links between governments, and so it can have a lot of different implications, as I said, in politics, in economy, in soft power, obviously, as well.
Okay, so linking what you just said before, between the Abu Dhabi and the United Arab Emirates and France, and that's where we see like East and West. And you talked about nation branding, you talked about soft power. However, away a little bit from that, how do you think that this museum can create, or this kind of connection can create a common ground for these cultures to meet, not only on an official way in building the international relations, but in bringing the people like more together?
Well, what is interesting with that museum, they decided to create a new type of museum. They describe themselves, their museum as a universalist museum. So for them, generally when you go to a museum, an antique museum, you see in one room Roman antiquities. When you go to another room, you find Greek antiquities, and in another room Etrusc antiquities. For them, they decided to show it all together. They use this word to describe themselves. They said that what defines them is the universal human creativity. So they don't really want to show the specificity of each culture, of each civilization or past. They want to show on a base of time how different civilization evolved. For example, they took one specific period, just like, for example, the century 5th, and they show different artwork from different countries, from different civilizations, but all together. So through that concept, it's going to be easier for the visitor, for anyone to see the differences and the similarities between each culture. So in that sense, it can create a common ground between civilization.
Thank you very much, Zoe, and I'm very happy to see Nathaly on stage.
Thank you.
And yeah, is it working? Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah, join us, Nathaly, welcome. Please welcome Nathaly Zamalloa. Yeah, Nathaly gonna present her. Yeah, can you?
Sorry. This presentation. Yeah. Thank you. I do it fast as I can. ¿Puedo hacerlo más rápido? No sé. Okay, so I will start presenting myself. My name is Nathaly Zamalloa, and I'm doing a research about indigenous women empowerment through cultural products. It's a case study in a community in Chahuaytiri in Peru. So the main of this research will be to contribute the empowerment of the indigenous artisan women in this community. It was identified that the cultural products and creativity is favorable to generate benefits to many families in this community. And the process of loom weaving is an important knowledge since the Inca's time. It's also very important to know that with this empowerment, with these tools, cultural identity and iconography, it's a very important key of preservation. So what is women empowerment as a theory? We refer to giving more opportunities to women in order to increase the self-esteem, economic, social, political strength, and individuals and as a community in a woman also. I will tell you some general information about this community. It's located in the south in Peru. The name is Chahuaytiri. It's in a little village, very, very touristic, that the name is Pisac. So we will say that Peru has growth economically since the last decade, but it is still some poverty, mostly in the rural communities. And the population, the indigenous population in all the country represents 6 million people around the north to the south, mostly in the jungle and in the mountains in Peru. So the community of Pisac is that I was talking to you about. It's a little, very, very touristic little village. And it's very known, this little village, because it's very touristic. There is a traditional market there where indigenous people, mostly women, come from up on the mountains to this market in order to sell their handicrafts. So what is the importance of these cultural products? As the UNESCO Convention Protection and Promotion said that in 2005 launched this convention in order, oh, I don't know what happened.
We can see it.
Okay, yeah, it's okay, I can continue. So the UNESCO launched this convention in order to preserve these products, because the globalization is a negative impact for this community. They are, with the new technologies, they are changing the way and the techniques how they have to use the products. They are replacing these products by a machine. So this is a very bad impact to these communities, because they are, again, are being poor, we will say. They are lose also identity. They are lose the self-esteem of the woman is very slow with this impact. I don't know how.
Wait, I'm going to click here.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then here, just like, yeah.
Okay. So this is a little example of the Inca's iconography. It's a textile made by handmade, and each of these symbols represents something. The women in these little communities have different iconography in each different community. This one is from the community I'm doing my research, and it tells in the textiles and the iconography, for example, the Andean calendar, how in all the year is constructed the calendar of the Inca's calendar, we will say. It also represents the animal. I don't know if you can see the condor. It's the main animal that represents this community, and the Andean sociology also. This is a typical clothing from this community. As you see, the woman is wearing a very long skirt that it's all made but handmade, and it also represents the flowers and the animals that live in their environment.
So what's the problematic? As I mentioned before, is the globalization and the new technologies who are replacing these products. And the mostly women are who suffer more because they are losing their self-esteem, they are losing their independence also, and not only that, their identity also. They think that because they are not, we have to say that these communities don't have the same options as people in the city. They don't have education. The only language they speak is Quechua because Spanish they don't get in the school. English, no, it's impossible. So for them, they have a very, very hard barriers to become or to go in a very market competency. And these companies are replacing these products. The companies are making profit with our cultural value. So yeah, thanks for your attention. I'm sorry for being late.
Please.